The sound of gunshots echoed across the barren terrain of the Dakota Territory as a lone rider slumped forward in his saddle, blood seeping through his shirt and vest. Dillon Prescott knew he was dying. The year was 1876, and the promise of gold in the Black Hills had drawn him north from Texas, only to lead him into an ambush by the notorious Hanson gang. They'd taken everything: his gold, his supplies, even his boots, before shooting him and leaving him for the vultures that now circled overhead. His horse, a sturdy Palomino, continued plodding forward without direction as Dillon faded in and out of consciousness. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the South Dakota landscape, the heat drawing what little moisture remained from his body. He didn't know how long he'd been riding: minutes, hours, perhaps a day. Time had lost all meaning as his life drained away with each labored breath. As darkness began to creep across his vision, Dillon caught sight of something in the distance: a small homestead nestled against the backdrop of rolling prairie. The modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney seemed like a mirage, a beautiful hallucination sent to comfort him in his final moments. His horse, sensing water or perhaps shelter, altered course slightly toward the structure. The last thing Dillon remembered before slipping into unconsciousness was falling from his saddle, his body hitting the hard, packed earth with a dull thud. In that moment of impact, he thought he heard a woman's voice calling out, but surely that was just the whisper of angels coming to claim him. Meredith Dawson had been hanging laundry when she spotted the horse and its slumped rider approaching her homestead. At first, she'd reached for the rifle that was never far from her side. A woman alone on the frontier couldn't be too careful, but when the man toppled from his mount, she knew he was no threat. "My God," she whispered, gathering her skirts and running toward the fallen stranger. He was a pitiful sight: face caked with dust and blood, shirt soaked crimson, and inexplicably missing his boots. Outlaws, she guessed immediately. The Dakota Territory was crawling with them these days, drawn by the same gold rush that had brought so many others to these parts. Meredith knelt beside the man, pressing her fingers to his neck. A pulse, faint but steady, confirmed he was alive, though barely. At 26, she'd seen her share of death and suffering, having lost both her husband and father to the harsh realities of frontier life. Something in her refused to let this stranger become another casualty of this unforgiving land. "You're not dying today," she said firmly, as if her words alone could keep death at bay. She whistled for her horse, a trick her father had taught her long ago. The animal came dutifully, and with strength born of years working the land, Meredith managed to drag the unconscious man onto a travois she hastily assembled from branches and rope. It wasn't elegant, but it would get him to her cabin. Once inside, Meredith worked methodically. She cut away his bloodied clothing, cleaned his wounds with whiskey, and extracted a bullet lodged in his shoulder. The second bullet had passed clean through his side, missing vital organs by mere inches. It was a miracle he'd survived this long. "Lucky man," she muttered as she stitched him up with the same steady hands she used for mending. Or maybe not so lucky, considering. For 3 days, Dillon remained unconscious, his body burning with fever as Meredith tended to him tirelessly. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, bathed his brow with cool cloths, and changed the poultice of herbs on his wounds, remedies learned from an old Lakota woman who had once saved her father's life. On the 4th morning, as dawn broke over the prairie, Dillon's eyes fluttered open. Confusion clouded his features as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings: the rough-hewn logs of the cabin walls, the patchwork quilt covering his body, and finally, the woman dozing in a chair beside his bed. She was striking, not in the conventional way of the painted ladies in saloons, but in her strength and severity. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her hands calloused from work, her face tanned from the sun. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, patched in several places. "Am I dead?" Dillon croaked, his throat painfully dry. Meredith startled awake, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her belt before recognition dawned. "Not for lack of trying," she replied, reaching for a cup of water on the nearby table. "Here, drink slowly." She held his head up, allowing him small sips. The simple act of kindness nearly undid him. "Where am I?" he asked when he could speak again. "My homestead." "About 15 miles outside of Yankton." She sat back, studying him with wary eyes. "I'm Meredith Dawson." "Dillon Prescott," he offered. "I owe you my life, Mrs. Dawson." A shadow passed across her face. "It's Miss Dawson now, or Meredith will do." She stood abruptly. "You should rest. Those wounds need time to heal properly." "The men who did this," Dillon began, attempting to sit up before pain forced him back down. "Will have to wait," Meredith finished firmly. "You're in no condition to seek revenge, Mr. Prescott. And I didn't waste good whiskey on your wounds just to have you tear them open." Despite the gravity of his situation, Dillon found himself smiling. "Yes, madam." Over the next week, Dillon regained his strength slowly. Meredith proved to be as skilled a nurse as she was a frontierswoman, tending to his wounds with efficiency while maintaining her daily chores. From his bed, Dillon watched her work feeding chickens at dawn, tending a small vegetable garden, mending clothes by lamplight. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, her answers were typically brief. One evening, as she changed the bandage on his shoulder, Dillon ventured a question. "How does a woman come to be alone on a homestead in the Dakota Territory?" Meredith's hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "The same way as anyone else, I suppose. You stake a claim and work the land. Most women don't. I'm not most women." She tied off the bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. "I've noticed," Dillon said softly. "Were you always alone?" Meredith sighed, relenting slightly. "No. My husband Thomas and I came out from Pennsylvania 3 years ago. He had dreams of building a cattle empire." A bitter smile touched her lips. "He died of pneumonia the first winter. My father joined me after that, but his heart gave out last spring." "I'm sorry," Dillon said, meaning it. "Why stay?" "Where would I go?" she countered. "Back east to be a burden on relatives who didn't approve of my marriage in the first place. This land is mine now. I've put too much of myself into it to abandon it." Dillon nodded, understanding the pride and stubbornness that kept her here. It was the same spirit that had driven him west from his family's failing farm in Kentucky years ago. "What about you?" Meredith asked unexpectedly. "What brought you to these parts? You don't strike me as a farmer." "I was a Texas Ranger once," Dillon admitted, "then a guide for cattle drives. Lately I've been prospecting in the Black Hills. With the Sioux Treaty broken and tensions rising, that's a dangerous game." "So I discovered," Dillon said ruefully. "I found a modest strike, nothing to make me rich, but enough to maybe start something of my own. The Hanson gang had other ideas." "The Hansons," Meredith's expression darkened. "They've been terrorizing settlements all through the territory. Killed the Millers over in Brookings County last month." "They'll kill again unless stopped," Dillon said grimly. "And I suppose you fancy yourself the man to do it." Meredith shook her head. "That's a quick way to end up dead for real this time." "I don't aim to die," Dillon assured her. "But I can't let them keep what they stole from me. It was everything I had." Meredith stood, gathering the used bandages. "Well, you won't be going anywhere for a while yet. Those wounds need at least another 2 weeks before you should even think about sitting a horse." As she turned to leave, Dillon caught her wrist gently. "Thank you, Meredith. Not everyone would take in a stranger bleeding to death." For the first time, her expression softened slightly. "Get some rest, Mr. Prescott. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep." True to her word, Meredith put Dillon to work as soon as he could stand without assistance. Simple tasks at first: shelling peas on the porch, whittling new handles for tools, keeping watch while she worked in the fields. As his strength returned, the tasks grew more demanding. He repaired the roof damaged in a recent storm, chopped firewood despite the pull on his healing wounds, and helped mend fences. They fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Meredith would rise before dawn to prepare a simple breakfast, and they would work side by side throughout the day. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes they would talk, sharing pieces of their past or discussing the news Meredith had gathered on her occasional trips into Yankton for supplies. One evening in late July, nearly a month after she'd found him, Dillon noticed Meredith studying a letter with a troubled expression. "Bad news?" he asked. She folded the paper carefully. "The bank in Yankton is calling in loans early. With the panic last year and the grasshopper plagues, they're worried about farmers defaulting." "Your loan." "My husband's loan," she corrected. "For cattle we never got and equipment that broke the first season. I've been making payments, but—" She trailed off, her pride preventing her from elaborating. "How much do you need?" Dillon asked. "It's not your concern," Meredith said sharply. "I'll manage." "I'm making it my concern," Dillon insisted. "You saved my life, Meredith. Let me help." "With what?" "The gold the Hansons stole." She shook her head. "I don't need charity, Mr. Prescott." "It's not charity," Dillon said. "It's repayment of a debt, and I fully intend to recover what's mine." "You're still healing." "I'm healed enough." To demonstrate, Dillon rolled his shoulder, wincing only slightly at the twinge of pain. "The Hansons have a camp in the Black Hills. I know where they hole up between raids. And you plan to just walk in and ask for your gold back?" Meredith's tone was scathing. "No," Dillon admitted, "but I have friends in Deadwood who might help. A man named Wild Bill Hickok owes me a favor." Meredith's eyes widened slightly. "The gunfighter, the same," Dillon smiled. "Though he prefers lawmen these days." "It's still too dangerous," Meredith insisted, though with less conviction. Dillon reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his own. "I can't stay here forever, living off your charity." "Is that what you think you're doing?" Meredith pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "You've more than earned your keep these past weeks." "Nevertheless," Dillon said gently, "I need to settle this score." "And you need that money for the bank." Meredith was silent for a long moment. "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow," Dillon decided. "The sooner I reach Deadwood, the better." That night, Meredith tossed and turned in her narrow bed, unable to sleep. The thought of Dillon leaving filled her with an unexpected dread. She'd grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice, to the way he sang softly while he worked. More than that, she'd grown to rely on his strength, his steady nature, his quick smile. When had he become more than just the wounded stranger she'd saved? The question haunted her until dawn, when she rose and prepared a more substantial breakfast than usual: eggs, bacon, and the last of her precious coffee. She packed provisions for his journey, including a small flask of whiskey for medicinal purposes, she insisted. As Dillon prepared to mount his horse, a sturdy gelding from Meredith's small stable, since his own Palomino had wandered off, Meredith handed him a folded paper. "What's this?" he asked, unfolding it to find a crude but accurate map. "A shortcut through the hills," she explained. "It'll save you a day's ride." Dillon studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes. "You didn't sleep." "I was busy making that," she deflected. Be careful, Dillon. The Hansons aren't known for mercy. I know. He hesitated, then added, I'll come back, Meredith, with or without the gold. Something flickered in her eyes, hope perhaps, or fear. You don't owe me anything more. It's not about owing, Dillon said softly. Before he could reconsider, he leaned down from the saddle and brushed his lips against hers, a brief, gentle kiss that left them both surprised. Meredith stepped back, her fingers touching her lips. That was something to remind me what I'm coming back to, Dillon finished with a smile. Keep that rifle handy while I'm gone. With a tip of his hat, also borrowed from Meredith's stores, Dillon rode away, the morning sun at his back. Meredith watched until he disappeared over the horizon, her heart pounding with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The journey to Deadwood took 3 days, even with Meredith's shortcut. Dillon traveled cautiously, avoiding the main trails where the Hanson gang might have lookouts. The Black Hills rose before him, their dark pine forests a stark contrast to the open prairie he'd left behind. Deadwood was exactly as he remembered it, a chaotic boomtown of muddy streets, hastily constructed buildings, and fortune seekers from every walk of life. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, cooking food, and the ever-present dust. Dillon made his way to the No. 10 Saloon, where Wild Bill Hickok could often be found playing cards. The famous lawman was indeed at his usual table, his back to the wall as was his custom. His long hair and mustache were as distinctive as ever, though perhaps with more gray than Dillon remembered. Well, I'll be damned, Hickok said when he spotted Dillon. Heard you were dead. Nearly was, Dillon confirmed, pulling up a chair. Mind if I join you? Hickok gestured to the empty seat. Hanson gang, wasn't it? News traveled fast on the frontier. 5 of them jumped me near Bear Butt. Took everything I had. And yet here you sit. Hickok studied him with shrewd eyes. Someone patch you up, a woman with a homestead outside Yankton, Dillon said, unable to keep the warmth from his voice. Saved my life. Must be some woman, Hickok observed with a knowing smile. What brings you to my table, Prescott? I doubt it's the pleasure of my company. I need information on the Hansons' camp, Dillon said, lowering his voice, and maybe a few good men. Hickok's expression turned serious. That's a tall order. The Hansons have at least a dozen men now, maybe more. I don't aim to fight them all, Dillon clarified. Just want what's mine back. And if they object, then we have a problem, Dillon admitted. I owe you for getting me out of that scrape in Abilene, Bill, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Hickok sighed, draining his whiskey. The woman in Yankton, she waiting for you. I told her I'd come back, with her money or without it. Hickok guessed correctly. Dillon nodded. But I'd prefer with. Always did admire a romantic fool, Hickok said with a chuckle. I know where they're camped. And I might know a few boys crazy enough to help. He leaned forward. But this has to be quick and quiet. I've got a bad feeling lately, can't sit with my back to a door anymore. I noticed, Dillon said, glancing at the wall behind his friend. Tomorrow night, Hickok decided. Meet me at the livery at sunset. And Prescott, he fixed Dillon with a steady gaze. If this goes sideways, your woman might be waiting a long time. She's not my woman, Dillon clarified, though the words felt false even as he spoke them. Keep telling yourself that, Hickok said with a knowing smile. The next evening, true to his word, Hickok arrived at the livery with 3 men, a former Texas Ranger named Ellis, a half-Lakota scout called Charlie White Horse, and a quiet sharpshooter who went by the name Colorado. They were a rough-looking bunch, but Dillon trusted Hickok's judgment. The Hansons are camped in a canyon about 6 miles southwest, Hickok explained as they rode out. They think it's secure because there's only one way in. And there is, Charlie White Horse added with a faint smile, if you're riding a horse. but a man on foot can come down from above. Their plan was simple but risky. Charlie would guide Dillon and Colorado to a position overlooking the camp, while Hickok and Ellis would approach from the main entrance, posing as prospectors with information about a new gold strike. The distraction would allow Dillon to locate his stolen goods and, if luck was with them, retrieve them without bloodshed. As night fell, they approached the canyon cautiously. Campfires glowed in the darkness below, and the sounds of laughter and drunken singing drifted up to their position. "Celebrating their latest robbery," Ellis muttered. Charlie led Dillon and Colorado along a treacherous path down the canyon wall. Several times, loose rocks nearly gave away their position, but the noise from the camp below covered their approach. From their vantage point, Dillon could make out about 15 men gathered around 3 fires. The leader, Frank Hansen, was unmistakable with his distinctive red beard. Beside him sat his younger brothers, Edward and Thomas. "There," Dillon whispered, pointing to a wagon near the largest tent. "That's where they'll keep valuables." Colorado positioned himself with his rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. Charlie melted into the shadows, circling to the far side of the camp to create a diversion if things went wrong. Minutes later, Hickok and Ellis rode into the canyon entrance, their approach announced by a sentry's call. The outlaws immediately grew alert, hands moving to weapons. "Easy, boys," Hickok called out, his distinctive voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Just passing through. Thought you might be interested in some information." Frank Hansen stepped forward, suspicious but curious. "What kind of information would be worth disturbing our evening, stranger?" "The kind that glitters," Hickok replied. "Word is there's a new strike up near Crow Creek. Thought I might sell the location to interested parties." As the discussion drew most of the gang's attention, Dillon crept toward the wagon. His heart pounded in his ears as he slipped between shadows, avoiding the occasional sentry. Reaching the wagon, he carefully searched through saddlebags and crates until he found a familiar leather pouch. Relief flooded through him as he verified the gold dust and nuggets were still there. He was about to retreat when he spotted his boots custom-made in El Paso and distinctive with their hand-tooled design. He couldn't leave them behind. Securing his recovered belongings, Dillon began his retreat. He had nearly reached the shadows when a voice called out behind him. "Hey! Who the hell are you?" Dillon turned to find one of the Hansen brothers, Thomas, the youngest, staring at him with recognition dawning in his eyes. "It's that ranger," Thomas shouted, reaching for his gun. "The one we shot." The camp erupted into chaos. Gunfire exploded from multiple directions as Colorado opened fire from his position, and Charlie set fire to a stack of supplies on the far side of the camp. Hickok and Ellis drew their weapons, creating even more confusion. Dillon ducked behind a boulder as bullets pinged off the rocks around him. He returned fire, trying to make his way back to the path up the canyon wall. A bullet grazed his arm, reopening his barely healed wound. "Prescott!" Hickok shouted from somewhere in the chaos. "Time to leave." Dillon made a dash for the path, firing blindly behind him. He scrambled up the steep incline, rocks and dirt slipping beneath his boots. At the top, Colorado waited, providing covering fire. "Charlie," Dillon gasped. "Already gone," Colorado confirmed. "Move!" They ran for their horses, tethered a short distance away. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire continued, then gradually faded as they rode hard away from the canyon. They rode through the night, following a stream to mask their trail, before finally stopping at a predetermined meeting point. Ellis was there, nursing a bullet wound to his leg. Charlie appeared shortly after, unharmed but breathing hard from the hard ride. Of Hickok, there was no sign. "Bill?" Dillon asked, fearing the worst. Ellis shook his head grimly. Took a bad hit, told us to go on. We can't leave him, Dillon insisted. He's Wild Bill Hickok, Charlie said simply. He knows these hills better than any white man. If anyone can make it out, he can. They waited until dawn, but Hickok didn't appear. With heavy hearts, they decided to split up. Ellis and Colorado would return to Deadwood to see if Hickok had somehow made it back, while Charlie would guide Dillon through a different route toward Yankton. You got what you came for, Charlie observed as they rode. Was it worth it? Dillon patted the pouch secured inside his shirt. Ask me when we're safely back. The journey back to Yankton was tense, with every rider they passed potentially being a member of the Hanson gang. They traveled mainly at night, resting during the day in hidden ravines or dense stands of trees. Charlie proved an invaluable guide, his knowledge of the terrain keeping them away from established trails where they might be ambushed. On the fourth day, Charlie left him at the border of the Dakota Territory. My people don't venture much further east, he explained. Too many settlements. Dillon clasped his hand in gratitude. I owe you. Charlie shook his head. You owe Hickok. Honor his help by living well. The words stayed with Dillon as he continued alone toward Meredith's homestead. He was still a day's ride away when he encountered a farmer heading to market who shared troubling news. Hanson's hit a place near Yankton 3 days back, the man said. Single woman's homestead. Heard they were looking for someone. Cold fear gripped Dillon's heart. Did you hear a name? Dawson. The farmer nodded grimly. That's the one. Poor woman refused to tell them anything, so they burned her barn. Dillon spurred his horse immediately, riding harder than was wise given the animal's fatigue. The countryside blurred past as his mind raced with terrible possibilities. Had he led the Hansons straight to Meredith? The thought was unbearable. As he crested the final hill overlooking her homestead, Dillon's worst fears seemed confirmed. Smoke still rose from the blackened remains of the barn, and the fields looked trampled by horses. The cabin, however, still stood. Drawing his revolver, Dillon approached cautiously. Meredith, he called, his voice tight with dread. The cabin door opened slowly, and Meredith emerged with a rifle pointed directly at him. Her face was bruised, a cut above her eye crusted with dried blood. When she recognized him, the rifle lowered slightly. You came back, she said, her voice hoarse. Dillon dismounted and approached her slowly, as one might a wounded animal. I told you I would. Meredith's composure cracked then, a single sob escaping before she controlled herself again. They came looking for you, said you'd stolen from them. Are you hurt? Dillon asked, gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. Nothing serious, she said, straightening her shoulders with visible effort. They didn't expect a woman alone to fight back. Got one of them in the shoulder before they overwhelmed me. Pride and sorrow warred within Dillon as he led her back inside the cabin. Everything was in disarray, furniture overturned, provisions scattered, her few personal belongings smashed on the floor. I'm so sorry, Dillon said, the words wholly inadequate. This is my fault. Yes, Meredith agreed bluntly. It is. She sank into a chair that had survived the ransacking. Did you at least get what you went for? Wordlessly, Dillon removed the pouch from inside his shirt and placed it on the table. Every last speck. Meredith stared at it for a long moment. People died for that, didn't they? Maybe, Dillon admitted. One of the men who helped me, a friend, didn't make it back to our rendezvous point. And the Hansons, still out there, Dillon said grimly. But they won't be looking for me here anymore. They think I'm heading to Nebraska. How did you manage that? Ran into a trader I know. Paid him well to spread word that he'd seen me heading south. Dillon knelt beside her chair. Meredith, I can't stay. Not after this. The Hansons will be back eventually, and I won't risk your life again. So you'll just leave? Meredith's voice had a dangerous edge. After bringing this down on me, after she stopped abruptly. After what? Dillon prompted gently. Meredith looked away. After making me care whether you lived or died. The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. Dillon reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. I thought about you every day I was gone, he confessed. Not just because I owed you, but because. He faltered, unused to articulating such feelings. Because. Meredith prompted, her eyes meeting his at last. Because in a month you became more important to me than anything else, Dillon said simply. More than the gold, more than settling scores. Then don't go, Meredith whispered. Not yet. The Hansons will come whether you're here or not, she interrupted. I've already been marked as your ally. At least with you here, I have a fighting chance. Dillon knew she was right. Running wouldn't protect her now, it would only leave her vulnerable. And the truth was, he didn't want to leave her again. All right, he agreed. We'll face them together if it comes to that. The next morning, they began rebuilding what the Hansons had destroyed. The barn would take the most work, but the immediate priority was securing the cabin and salvaging what crops hadn't been trampled. Neighbors from miles around, hearing of the attack, came to assist, a testament to the respect Meredith had earned in the community. While they worked, Dillon sent a telegram to the territorial marshal, reporting the Hanson gang's location and crimes. It wasn't much, but it might help bring them to justice eventually. Days turned into weeks as they fell back into their routine, though everything was different now. There was a new awareness between them, a tension that occasionally manifested in lingering touches or glances held too long. Neither seemed ready to address it directly, both scarred in different ways by their pasts. It was Meredith who finally broke the stalemate. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the prairie sky, she turned to him with determination in her eyes. I paid off the bank loan today, she said. Your gold was more than enough. Dillon smiled. Good. That was the whole point of going after it. Was it? Meredith asked, her gaze steady. Or was that just what you told yourself? What do you mean? I think you wanted revenge, she said bluntly. I understand that, but it nearly got you killed. It nearly got me killed. Dillon couldn't deny it. You're right, and I'm sorry for that. I don't want your apologies, Meredith said, her voice softening. I want to know what happens now. What do you want to happen? Dillon countered, suddenly nervous in a way that facing the Hansons hadn't made him. Meredith's expression was vulnerable yet determined. I want you to stay. Not because you feel obligated or because you're protecting me, but because you want to. I do want to, Dillon admitted. More than anything. Then why haven't you kissed me again? The directness of her question startled a laugh from him. Because I wasn't sure you wanted me to. I'm telling you now, Meredith said, moving closer. I do. This time, their kiss was nothing like the brief goodbye they'd shared weeks ago. This was a declaration, an affirmation of feelings that had been growing since the day she'd found him dying on her land. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I love you, Dillon said simply. I think I have since you told me I wasn't dying on your watch. Meredith smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her face. I think I started loving you when you insisted on fixing my roof despite your wounds. You're a stubborn man, Dillon Prescott. Look who's talking, he teased, drawing her close again. They were married that autumn in Yankton's small church, with half the county in attendance. The territorial marshal himself came to give the bride away, and to inform them that the Hanson gang had finally been captured after a botched bank robbery in Sioux Falls. Justice, it seemed, had caught up with them at last. News also reached them from Deadwood. Wild Bill Hickok had indeed survived the skirmish with the Hansons, only to be shot dead weeks later while playing cards in the No. 10 saloon. The famous lawman had been sitting with his back to the door for once a fatal mistake. Dillon mourned his friend quietly, grateful for the sacrifice that had helped bring him back to Meredith. With the threat of the Hansons removed and the bank loan settled, Dillon and Meredith turned their attention to building a future together. Using the remainder of the gold and Dillon's knowledge of cattle, they purchased a small herd to start the ranch Thomas Dawson had once dreamed of. The work was hard, the weather unforgiving, and the future uncertain. But they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing season. When winter came, bringing blizzards that isolated their homestead for weeks, they found comfort in each other's arms and the home they were creating. Spring arrived with new calves, promising crops, and the discovery that Meredith was expecting their first child. The news filled Dillon with both joy and trepidation. What if I'm not good at this? He confessed one night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. At what? Being a father? Meredith turned to face him in the darkness. You'll learn, just as we both learned to run this ranch together. I never knew my own father, Dillon admitted. He left when I was young. Then you'll be the father you wished you'd had, Meredith said confidently. Besides, this child will have something neither of us did growing up, a home filled with love. Her words comforted him, as did the months that followed. They prepared for the baby's arrival, converting a corner of their bedroom into a nursery. Dillon built a cradle from pine harvested from their land, while Meredith sewed tiny garments from her own recut dresses. Their son was born on a crisp October day, exactly 1 year after their wedding. They named him William Thomas Prescott, William for Hickok, who had helped bring Dillon back to her, and Thomas for the husband whose dream they were now fulfilling. The boy had Dillon's dark hair and Meredith's determined chin, a perfect blend of them both. As Dillon held his son for the first time, he marveled at how close he had come to never experiencing this moment. Had Meredith not found him bleeding in the dirt, had she not refused to let him die, this future would have been lost to him forever. What are you thinking? Meredith asked, exhausted but radiant as she watched them. That I'm the luckiest man alive, Dillon replied honestly, and that sometimes being left for dead is the best thing that can happen to a man. Meredith laughed softly. Don't make a habit of it. No, madam, he promised, leaning down to kiss her. Once was more than enough. The years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Their ranch prospered despite setbacks, droughts, harsh winters, and the continuing challenges of frontier life. Their family grew with the addition of a daughter, Eliza Jane, 2 years after William's birth. When the railroad finally reached Yankton in 1881, it brought new opportunities. Cattle prices rose as eastern markets became more accessible, and their modest herd expanded into one of the most respected in the territory. Dillon's experience as a Texas Ranger and cattle driver proved invaluable, while Meredith's tenacity and financial acumen kept them solvent through even the toughest times. Their homestead, once a lonely cabin on the prairie, grew into a proper ranch house with a bunkhouse for the hands they now employed. The barn that had been burned by the Hansons was replaced by a larger, sturdier structure that housed not only their horses, but also equipment for the expanding operation. Through it all, Dillon and Meredith's bond remained unshakable. The love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances deepened with each passing year, tempered by shared struggles and strengthened by shared triumphs. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dillon surprised Meredith with a gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children, painted by an artist in Sioux Falls. As she opened it, a small folded paper fell out. "What's this?" she asked, unfolding it to find a deed. The last 40 acres adjoining our property to the north, Dillon explained. Makes us one of the largest spreads in the county now. Meredith's eyes widened. How did you manage it? The Hendersons refused to sell for years. Let's just say I can be persuasive when motivated, Dillon said with a smile. And I had something they wanted more than land. What was that? My gold pocket watch, Dillon admitted sheepishly. Turns out old man Henderson has been collecting timepieces since the war. Meredith laughed, the sound as delightful to Dillon now as it had been the first time he'd heard it. You traded your prized watch for land. For our future, Dillon corrected, pulling her close. Besides, I've never much cared what time it is as long as I'm spending it with you. The sentiment, though perhaps a bit corny, was entirely sincere. Time had indeed lost much of its significance for Dillon since that fateful day when Meredith had found him dying. Each moment with her felt like a gift he had never expected to receive. Their children grew strong and capable, as at home on horseback as they were with books and learning. William inherited his father's easy charm and his mother's determination, while Eliza combined Meredith's practicality with Dillon's sense of adventure. Both children knew the story of how their parents had met. It had become something of a family legend, though Dillon and Meredith were careful to omit the most violent details until they were older. Did you really save Papa's life, Mama? 9-year-old Eliza asked one evening as Meredith tucked her into bed. I did, Meredith confirmed. He was in a very bad way when I found him. Were you scared? Meredith considered the question seriously. Not of him. I was scared he might die before I could help him. And then you fell in love, Eliza sighed dreamily. Not right away, Meredith corrected with a smile. First, I made him work for his keep. He fixed the roof and chopped firewood and helped with the harvest. While he was still hurt, Eliza's eyes widened. He was very stubborn, Meredith said fondly. Still is. From the doorway came Dillon's amused voice. I prefer to call it determined. Papa, Eliza exclaimed. Did you really get shot by bad men? I did, Dillon said, entering the room and sitting on the edge of her bed. And your mother was very brave to take in a stranger like that. I'm glad she did, Eliza said seriously. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. That's very true, Dillon agreed, exchanging a warm look with Meredith. It's something I'm thankful for every day. After Eliza finally drifted off to sleep, Dillon and Meredith retreated to the porch, their favorite place to end the day together. The prairie stretched before them, bathed in moonlight, the land they had worked so hard to tame now sustaining their family and their dreams. You ever regret it? Dillon asked suddenly. Regret what? Meredith leaned against his shoulder, taking me in, getting involved in my troubles with the Hansons, any of it. Meredith was quiet for a moment, considering. I've regretted many things in my life, Dillon, marrying too young the first time. Not knowing enough about ranching when we started, letting William ride that half-broken bronc last summer. She turned to face him. But saving you? Never, not for a single moment. Dillon pulled her closer, overwhelmed as always by the strength of this remarkable woman who had not only saved his life but had given it purpose and meaning beyond anything he could have imagined. When I was lying there bleeding, he confessed, I thought I saw an angel coming for me. Turns out I wasn't entirely wrong. Meredith snorted softly. An angel with calloused hands and a bad temper. The best kind, Dillon insisted, kissing her temple. As they sat together watching the stars, Dillon reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. Had the Hanson gang not ambushed him? Had Meredith not found him when she did? Had she been a different sort of woman who shied away from blood and danger, any change in that sequence of events would have led to a vastly different outcome. He might have bled to death alone on the prairie, becoming just another unnamed victim of frontier violence. Or he might have survived only to continue his solitary existence, drifting from one prospect to another, never finding a place to truly call home. Instead, he had found not only a home but a family and a love that had transformed him. The restlessness that had driven him west from Kentucky all those years ago had finally been quieted. In Meredith, in their children, in the life they had built together against incredible odds, he had found everything he hadn't known he was searching for. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Meredith asked, breaking into his reverie. "Just counting my blessings," Dillon replied honestly. "And thinking that sometimes a man doesn't know what he truly wants until it finds him. Like a stubborn woman with a rifle," Meredith suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," Dillon agreed, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the tenderness and passion of their years together, yet somehow still felt as fresh and surprising as their first. The Dakota Territory would eventually become part of the new state of South Dakota, and Yankton would lose its status as territorial capital to Bismarck. The frontier that had shaped them would gradually disappear as more settlers arrived, more towns were established, and the wild spaces between were tamed by fences and railroads. But on their ranch outside Yankton, Dillon and Meredith Prescott continued to build their legacy. Their children grew up and started families of their own, William taking over much of the ranch operations, while Eliza, to everyone's surprise, went east to attend college before returning to help manage the business side of the expanding Prescott holdings. And through it all, the story of how they met remained a cornerstone of their family's history, the tale of a cowboy left for dead by outlaws, and the woman who refused to let him die. It was a story of second chances, of courage in the face of danger, and of a love that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances, but had proven stronger than any challenge life could present. It was their story, written across the Dakota prairie in seasons of struggle and joy, and it continued long after the wounds that had first brought them together had healed, leaving only the faintest of scars as reminders of where their journey had begun.